What you're seeing here is an India motorcycle Thunderstroke 116 motor, and we have 3 tools, all which are tasked at putting this motor back together. So for me to split the motor initially, I used a tool from Motion Pro called the case splitter, and what it does, it uses the output shaft of the transmission right here. It mounts here, and as it's forcing it through, it pulls the case apart and allows you to access the internals of the motor. Well, when we're putting it back together, we need to use the crankshaft and pull the crankshaft through. And as we're pulling it through, it forces the motor cases back together, or at least the halves back together, and it joins it together. So these 3 tools all do or can do the same thing, except these 2 are better and recommended, and this one is not, because there's more prone. There's more error that we can create if we're using this alone. So this is the tool that I originally was supposed to use from Motion Pro, the crankshaft puller. And I'm gonna mount both of these tools up and show you why one worked and one didn't. But again, the whole purpose here is that we're pulling the crankshaft through, but we have to have a smooth and level mating surface as we're pulling this through, because the problem that'll happen is if you're pulling this through more than you're pulling this through, or even this through, what ends up happening is that the case will not mate evenly, and you can end up creating something called galleon, which is metal on metal and it's uneven. You can destroy the bearings, or worse, the teeth on the output shaft, or also destroy the crankshaft bearing here, and you're gonna have a whole bunch of problems. Both of these tools use a similar method to pull the crankshaft through, but this one, as you can see, it has a hook there for the bolt. If you're using a female crankshaft like I am, it can pull the bolt as it's trying to tighten and pull the crankshaft through. And this is the end of the tusk. As you can see, it doesn't quite look the same, but that bolt at the end is removable, and that's what allows us to slot the bolt through and tighten it to the crankshaft. But I'll show you how both of these work. We'll take our crankshaft bolt, screw that down. Let's see, like that. Essentially, it's supposed to slot like that. Now that we have the Motion Pro tool mounted, in theory what's supposed to happen is as you're cranking this down, it's going to be pulling the crankshaft through, pushing this side down, and you take a mallet and you just tap on various sides, because you don't want this side to go down too far from this side and it ends up being uneven. But the problem with the Motion Pro tool is, even with the large adapter on it, it's still not giving us the security we need when trying to get this on here. See that gap? That gap is still there, and we still need a level surface when we're doing it. Get this off. Let's see. And the premise of this tool is the same, but we first have to take off this end of the tool. And then we're going to sit this part of the tool here, and we're going to thread the crankshaft bolt through this, and it's going to mate against that little lip that's inside of that. To make it more secure, we're going to use the socket. Get it a little snug. And now we have that on there. And we're going to take the middle part of the tool, disassembled. I'm going to screw it back on there. And then I'm going to take this part of the tool, slide it back down on there. There's a little lip in here also. Let's see, where's that little? Yep, there's a lip. Slide right down on that. Goes all the way in. It sits flush inside of this crankshaft bearing. Well, if we were to start cranking down, you see that little gold ring in there? That's the bearing, and we don't want to be pushing against that. And that could potentially cause galleon, also destroy the bearing. So Tusk conveniently gave us these little steel rods. Like I said before, we want a level surface. So we're going to slide those steel rods between the mating surface and the Tusk tool. And then that's going to give us the mating surface we need versus putting it on the bearing and putting load across that bearing. Lower this. Take one rod, slide it in there like that. Take the other rod, same thing. So once we have them in there, as close as possible, like that. Just gonna tighten this down. See, it's already starting to slide in. And this is essentially what it looks like. So we got the tool mounted, it's flush, and we have these little steel rods in here, making sure that they're not on the oil passage lines, because if we crank down on this, we crack this, we're gonna have a problem. But again, these allow the tool to sit flush, and as we start cranking down on this, it's gonna pull the crankshaft through evenly, and we're not putting load on the bearing. And as we're doing this, as you guys saw, it already started to force it down. Then we're just going to want to tap on the other sides as we're cranking it down. Let's say you didn't have these two tools and all you had was a mallet. It's still possible to mate the halves together to rejoin the case, but it's not recommended. Let me show you. As we start cranking down on the crankcase, we need to check the various components and making sure they're being pulled through the bearings squarely, just like this. The shift drum right there, the balancer, and of course, the crankshaft. So this tool definitely helps. This does not mean that the Motion Pro tool is a bad tool. It is just the tool that is not right for this job. All right. This is a mallet, a simple mallet. And we can use this tool in the event of not having the Motion Pro tool or the Tusk tool that actually works to mate this Thunderstroke 116 case. It's not recommended to do this for various reasons, as I mentioned before, making the case uneven, or if you hammer in the wrong place, you could destroy the oil passage lines, you could destroy the bearings. But I have found in various spots that does work when I was testing this, because I've never made it this case before, and I wanted to try this before I put gasket on or liquid silicone, and I had no choice but to get it done at that point. So let me show you what I found. So again, the goal is to pull the crankshaft through, the balancer, all these different components evenly. So you're not going to be able to just hammer in one place without making one side uneven. So what I found is we have points here, we have points here, we have a point 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 here. And sometimes I'll tap here, lightly, very light taps. But what you'll find is that if you hit in these various spaces, you'll be able to mate this case and you won't have a problem. But as long as you do it evenly, you will be able to get away with it. But obviously the better way of doing this is to have a tool to do this. But I mean, I guess you could say this is a tool, it's just not the recommended tool. And there's one more bonus option that you can try. These are the crankcase bolts. You could thread these bolts into the crankcase and tighten these down in a specific pattern based on the manual, because even when you're torquing these down, they have to go in a specific order, again, to make sure that the case is being torqued down evenly. You could use those to draw the case closed. I have not tried that method, but there are people that have tried that. That is also an option. The value here is knowing that even when you have a tool, it may not work. Both of these tools are advertised as pulling crankshafts through and mating cases, but they were never specified to work on this specific motor. The Motion Pro tool, it works on other motors. It doesn't work on this one. The Tusk, it wasn't advertised that it works on any motorcycle, but guess what? It works. The mallet, it is not advertised as a crankshaft tool. but it can work in the right hands. And sometimes when you're rebuilding motorcycles, in my case, you have to improvise. What's also interesting is that neither of these tools or these methods fully work without the use of this. Because as we're drawing it closed, we still have to tap in various areas to make it even. So at the end of the day, we still need our trusty old mallet to make this happen. And that, my friends, is all a part of learning, as I'm always doing in this garage as I rebuild these bikes. So this part will go on the shelf, or maybe it'll get sent back and maybe I'll need it for something else. But I hope you learned something. And hey, if you want to see me fully put this motor back together and follow along with everything I've done with this bike, you can click right here and catch up on that series. But as always, thanks for listening to my story. And if you're subscribed, see you in the next one. Peace.